call halal, Yahweh Ba'Hashem Yahushai, Shalom Yasharahla. I want to give all praises to Yahweh Ba'Hashem Yahushai, to the 144,000 elect, and to the 1/3 of all men, women, and children that are coming back to these law, statutes, and commandments in these last days. So I want to go over a quick lesson on precepts, because this is a slightly overlooked aspect of learning the Bible. Okay, because if you're new to this truth, or if you're just hearing these words for the first time, you know, the way brothers bring the word out might confound people. You know, people get upset because they're coming from all these different understandings, mostly stemming from Christianity, and they don't understand that the Bible has a specific algorithm to it. It's not like any other book. You know, you might go to Barnes and Noble, grab a book off the shelf, and when you get home and start reading it, you're gonna start from page 1, and you're gonna read straight through, because that's how you get the understanding of that book. And that's how the world typically understands, and this is how the world typically learns a new subject. It's by reading a book in chronological order. But when it comes to the Bible cannot be understood in that same manner. And it explains itself, and it tells you how one can understand the Bible. So we're going to go ahead and start off with Isaiah 28 and 10. This is the book of Isaiah, chapter 28 and verse 10. For precept must be upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little and there a little. So Isaiah is explaining that the Bible is a book of law. Not only is it a book of law, statutes, and commandments, but it's filled with precepts that you have to apply with other precepts. You have to connect dots, so to speak, to understand what you're reading. Now, let's not assume that anyone knows what a precept is. So let's go get the definition of a precept. So this is Bing's definition of precept. Number 1, a general rule intended to regulate behavior or thought. That's what a precept is in the scriptures, right? You may have heard of the word concept, which is like a precept, but a concept is more abstract. Okay, so a concept is more of an idea, right, that pertains to a particular subject, but a precept is an idea which is intended to regulate your behavior. So you have one that tells you how to live your life, and the other kind of gives you a general understanding of something. In the book of Isaiah, by applying precepts and connecting them to each other, that is how you're going to get the proper understanding of the scriptures. All right, so let's get another scripture. So we're going to go to Psalms 119 and 93. This is the book of Psalms, chapter 119 and 93. I will never forget thy precepts, for with them thou hast quickened me. So David is saying that he will never forget these precepts, because if it wasn't for the precepts, he would not have been able to develop in the spirit. The entire scriptures is based around understanding these precepts. Now, you would think that, oh, my church, the church that I go to, uses precepts all the time. And that may be the case. But here's the problem with the church. We're going to go to Isaiah. We're going to go to the book of Isaiah, chapter 29 and 13. Wherefore the Lord said, for as much as this people draw near me with their mouth, and with their lips do honor me, but have removed their heart far from me, and their fear toward me is taught by the precept of men. Right? Because the precepts of them, they teach precepts of men. All right? Because they're not putting precepts together. What the church actually does is churches will isolate certain precepts in certain books, mainly Paul's books, and then they'll use those precepts to give a lesson about the Bible, about the entire Bible. And that's not how the algorithm works. It says precept upon precept, here little and there little, line upon line. And the reason why is because, number one, it is the Lord who is speaking through all these prophets. So it's the same entity that's saying the words. So there's not going to be any contradictions. That's number one. The Bible is a book of sound doctrine, which means that you cannot use one precept to attack another precept or cancel out another precept. But what you can do is you can use one precept to harmonize with another. So what that means is, if precept number 1 is saying one thing, and it seems like precept number 2 is saying the completely opposite, then you have the wrong understanding. A better understanding is if you can make precept number 1 fit with precept number 2, because there's no way that they can contradict each other. So you always have to check your understanding by going precept upon precept, line upon line, here a little and there a little, as the prophets of old have always done and continue to do till this very day. So precepts are very important. But today, this world is full. This world is filled with precepts that have been taught by men and not of the Most High. And what are some of those precepts? You may know them as popular sayings or quotes. Let's just find a few. Quotes by famous people. The greatest glory in living lies not in never failing, or Salakia, never falling, but in rising every time we fall. This is a quote or a precept by Nelson Mandela, telling you that it's not about the failure, it's about getting up, right? You may have heard, and actually that comes from the scriptures, to be honest. Proverbs 24:16. For a just man falleth 7 times and riseth up again, but the wicked fall into mischief. So this is just a saying that's attributed to a carnal man, but it really comes from the scriptures. But then you have all these other sayings that come from these other so-called men of the world that don't come from the scriptures, right? But people will take these precepts, they'll meditate on them, and then they'll live according to how these men recommend you should live. And most of the time, these are men who have had high positions. Like you see Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple. You got Eleanor Roosevelt. You got James Cameron. You got Oprah Winfrey. So these are people who are successful people. So the weight in the words that they use and the sayings that they use hold fast to a lot of people who subscribe to them. Okay, so going back to Isaiah 29:13, wherefore the Lord said, for as much as this people draw near me with their mouth and with their lips do honor me, but have removed their heart far from me, and their fear toward me is taught by the precept of men. So in 2020, you have a world full of people who do all this lip service. They sound good. They're using all these famous quotes, right? But in their heart, it's nowhere near what the Lord is asking of them. And their fear is not really a fear of the Lord. It's really the fear of these precepts that are taught by men. So they don't fear the Lord because they're not using his precepts. They actually are fearing man because they are taking heed to his precepts. And when the Bible talks about your heart, it's really talking about your mind, because your heart only is an organ, and your spirit and then your physical body, right, have a connection. And your emotions, your inspiration, all of that comes from your spirit. And when it manifests in your body, those feelings and emotions that manifest through your body stem from your heart. And then your heart dictates what your mind ultimately thinks. And then the mind dictates what the body does. So when the Lord is talking about your heart, he's really talking about your mind, because what's on your heart ends up going through your mind, and then it ultimately manifests in physical action. And their fear toward me is taught by the precept of men, right? So we know when you go into these precepts, you'll see that all these words that we use on a daily basis have different definitions in the Bible, which makes it even more important to understand the precepts, because your heart, you might think, is a good thing all the time, but when you read the scriptures, you realize that it's not always a good thing. You got people who, just go off of what their heart tells them, and that's a fallacy, because your heart can tell you to do a lot of wicked things as well. And then there's also a definition of fear. Psalms chapter 111 and verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. A good understanding have all they that do his commandments. His praise endureth forever. So when you're reading all these precepts and you're like, okay, so that's what fear is. Fear is the beginning of wisdom, and that wisdom is the law, statutes, and commandments. So in Isaiah 29 and 13, when you're reading, their fear toward me is taught by the precept of men, that means that these men aren't teaching the commandments. That's basically what it's saying. So you have a whole bunch of people that are talking about the Lord. They love the Lord. They say with their lips that they love the Lord. They say they believe, but in their heart, their actions are far from him. Why? Because they're not even keeping the commandments. So this is how you put precepts together. By putting precepts together, it allows you to paint a picture of what the words are actually saying, or what the Lord is actually trying to communicate to you. Because you also have other stumbling blocks. You have a span of what 3,500 years where different nations were ruling in different times. There were different events that were taking place on the earth, and then you have things that was happening specifically to the Lord's people. And if you don't understand all these different aspects, then you'll never really truly have the context of what you're reading. A lot of times when brothers are teaching, people, scoffers or people who are unbelievers, they always want to say, well, you got to put it in context. You got to put it in context, because when they hear us going from one book to reading one verse and then connecting another precept to the New Testament, that confounds them, because in their minds they're like, wait a minute, why don't you read the whole book to get the understanding, right? Because according to them, according to how the world has molded them, you can only get an understanding of something by reading the entire thing. Now, my disclaimer is that yes, you can get additional detail by reading the entire chapter. First of all, it's much more time effective if you're trying to teach a lesson to someone to break it down into digestible pieces that they can understand. Those digestible pieces are the precepts. A lot of times brothers don't have, if brothers were to sit and read entire chapters of the Bible to people, first of all, they would fall asleep. the world's already asleep. But when you start reading the words, that will make them fall asleep. The Lord will put them to sleep, because that's for what you do at home. Okay, when you're studying, when you're trying to build yourself up in the spirit, of course you read the entire chapter, you see what was going on. But when you put the precepts together, it's like doing like connecting the dots, right? When you connect enough dots, you start to see the image. All the fine details don't matter when you can see the bigger picture. That's basically what I'm trying to say. So it's very important to learn precepts, okay? And that is also how you're going to be able to discern the real from the fake, sound doctrine from contradictory doctrine. When you put precepts together, there's only one doctrine that's always going to succeed, and that is the doctrine that we teach. The so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans who refer to themselves as Israelites, that is the only doctrine that's going to hold fast. Why? Because we are backed through keeping the commandments. All these other doctrines, Christianity and all of its branches, there's always going to be a missing piece. There's always going to be a precept that breaks down the entire doctrine, which is why they like to stay away from the Old Testament, which is why they like to stay away from Revelation. They want to go precept upon precept within a subset of books, instead of hearing what all the prophets have said from the beginning to the end of the Bible. So I just want to get a few more precepts and we'll close out. We'll go to Matthew 22 and 29. And Yahushua answered and said unto them, Ye do err, not knowing the scriptures, nor the power of God. So Yahushua went through it more than anyone, because he's living in a world of carnal people when he is spiritual. So he was always being questioned. He was always being challenged for the knowledge that he knew, because the people who were questioning him, they were coming from a carnal perspective, and they were always at error in knowing the scriptures, because they didn't know how to put these precepts together, and they weren't keeping the commandments. All right, we'll go to second Timothy chapter 3 and verse 7. Ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. So it doesn't matter. You might think that you can pick up the Bible and just read it and understand it. I've had people tell me, oh yeah, in my free time, I just picked up the Bible and I just read it straight through, and was unable to teach me anything about the Bible. You got people who go to theology school and get a degree in theology, okay? And then you got people who have been going to church from a very young age all the way up into their adulthood. And all these types of people will never be able to come into the knowledge of the truth if they have not been going precept upon precept and keeping the commandments. That's basically what it all comes down to. And it is for that reason why all of a sudden people think, well, in the Old Testament, that was for the Israelites, but now salvation is being offered through Jesus Christ. So now, at one point in time, it was only for a group of people, and now it's opened up to everybody. That in itself is a contradiction, right? So all these things start to break down once you really start putting precepts together. And that reminds me of Matthew 7 and 13. Enter ye in at the straight gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there be which go in threat. So there's many ways to die. There's many ways to get this thing wrong. There's many ways to be led in the wrong direction. But that straight gate is a very narrow way. And it can't get any more narrow than the law, statutes, and commandments. That's what you have to understand. So your barometer for truth should be, is this person stacking precepts? Are they putting precepts together? Well, first and foremost, are they keeping the commandments? Do you see them with fringes on? Do they keep the Sabbath? Do they keep the dietary laws? Do they keep the high holy days? Not just the ones that talk about it. Are they actually doing it? And just because you might not see, just because you might find one thing that someone is not doing, does not disqualify them for knowing the truth. Everybody is learning at different speeds, and we all didn't come into the truth overnight. So we are still working towards that perfection, but that should not be a reason to disqualify someone, right? Because you get into a conversation with them and you don't see their fringes on. You never know that they might be coming from work. They might be working at a job that they're not able to wear their fringes on their job and still keep it. You never know what situation someone might be in. So you always have to have a heart of understanding and a heart of mercy towards your brother, because if he's trying to do right in the spirit, then you should be able to forgive him, especially if you want the Lord to forgive you, because we're all guilty of sin. So don't be overzealous about trying to find fault in brothers who are trying to do right. If they're keeping these laws, if they're to the best of their ability, and they're going precept upon precept, then that's a brother that you should want to have in your circle. That's a sister you might want to have in your circle. Why? Because the only thing that they're worried about is serving the Lord and repenting. All right? When it comes to the other nations, like, that's when precepts really start to make more sense, because other nations always try to include themselves in this thing. They want to drink that cup of salvation, but even if that was offered to them, would they do it? Right? We're going to go to the book of 2nd Ezra. This is the book of 2nd Ezra, chapter 3 and verse 36. Thou shalt find that Israel by name hath kept my precepts. Salakia. This is the book of 2nd Ezra, chapter 3 and verse 36. Thou shalt find that Israel by name hath kept thy precepts, but not the heathen. So at the end of this thing, when it's all said and done, everyone will realize that it's only you Negroes, Hispanics, and Native Americans that care about this Bible enough to repent, keep the commandments, and live. All right, well, that's all I really want to get into. Lord willing, you were edified. If one person was edified, the job has been done. Make sure you like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. I want to give all praises to Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahweh Shai for putting the spirit on me to do this video. Until next time, Shalom.